Good evening. Welcome to the Caitlin Francis podcast. It is evening here in California, and I have some things to say. So I was inspired today because I went to the Ronald Reagan Library with my kids. It was homeschool day, and they got in for free with the price of an adult ticket. So I paid, and then the kids all got in for free. It was wonderful. It was lovely. They've got a great place there. I remember going in high school, and it was really fun. But as I was there, one of my posts from, I think it was just yesterday, went ahead and just blew right up. So I want to talk about that because I have actually two posts in the last few days that have gone kind of crazy, and they're actually a little bit linked, like not completely. But by the end of today, people had been linking them together in the comments, and I was just inspired today. And I asked my husband to help me set this up again because I have some things to say. So we're going to go ahead and say those things. First of all, I'm just going to read you the two separate, but somehow interconnected posts that I made in the last couple of days. So a few days ago, 3 days ago, it says, I posted and the funniest part about both of these is that they're totally offhand comments. Like they were literally thrown out at the last second as I was like thinking about a whole bunch of other different things and like a whole bunch of like other different posts that I'd read all day. And I just like threw them both out there and then walked away from my phone. And, the next day, all hell had broken loose. So the first one, 3 days ago, I simply stated, I have 0 issues carrying around proof of citizenship, seeing as I am, a citizen. And that was sort of like an offhand comment that I made. And then this yesterday, there's this article floating around. I'm sure that most of you have maybe seen it, maybe not. I know that I act like everybody is on X, but it's really just me and a whole bunch of other homeschool moms that follow me. But on X, there was an article floating around by someone named Olga, I'm going to butcher this, Kahazan. And the title of this article was, He Was Homeschooled for Years and Fell So Far Behind. A new memoir shows how a lack of accountability can hurt home-educated kids. And so I took this article and ran with it because X is where I like to be snarky sometimes. And so this is what I wrote. I said, come on, just let us regulate it a little bit. You're not hiding anything, right? Shouldn't you be okay with us just checking in, like just sometimes, because a few kids will fall behind. It'll only be a little, just till we make sure everyone is safe. Now, of course, in truly Caitlin Goosen, that was a slip of the tongue. That was my maiden name. In truly Caitlin Francis fashion, I used the word ensure instead of sure. And I know that that's not what I meant to type. So autocorrect doing me dirty yet again. But if it's not a homeschool post with a typo that I've made, is it going viral? No, never going viral. So at this point, we are up to, I think, 1,000 comments on that one. That one went kind of crazy. And then my other one about the 0 issue carrying around proof, because we're talking about all this week. Everybody's been talking about the stuff going on in Minnesota, where it's this whole big deal that ICE is arresting violent criminals and attempting to deport them. And a whole bunch of people are acting like this is the end of the world and how dare they? And they're just rounding people up in the streets. They might be rounding them up in the streets, but that's because that's where the criminals are running. So they're then gathering them up. So I offhand shot this off about this idea that I have no problem carrying proof of citizenship. And of course, I had all kinds of pushback on that one. Keith Olbermann commented on that one. So that was funny. But the point of all of that is that after this other one about the homeschooling went viral today, I come back home and I get a whole bunch of comments in this vein. And I'm going to black out her name because I like her as a person and we often disagree, but she was trying to have a good faith conversation with me. So I'm not trying to pick on her specifically. But the comment was this: homeschool regulations to make sure that children aren't being abused or neglected, even if rare, seem worth it to me. But I understand people who are nervous about the government expanding and exercising more power, which is why being checked for citizenship while out and about feels a little funky and semi-fascist. So she was basically calling me a hypocrite for also saying a few days ago that I wouldn't mind showing my ID to prove my citizenship. And then at the same time turning around and saying that the government basically has no place regulating home education, especially as a private citizen in the United States. So those things are, I will admit, they seem very interconnected. And so that's why I'm not like trying to rag on her. I just think that it's a misunderstanding of the balance of the dynamics of the different power structures that exist in society. So first of all, when I made that comment about the not being bothered by carrying my ID since I was a citizen, I certainly live in a world where I assume a certain safety in being a citizen of the United States of America. Now, I know that's not true for every country in the world. Maybe citizenship doesn't mean the same thing to other countries as it does to the United States. But historically, with the exception of, corruption and other mistakes or things that happen in the rule of law that happens when you're trying to run a country with 300 million plus people in it, historically, it's been pretty understood that if you're a citizen of the United States and you follow the law, you will be safe. No one's going to snatch you out of your car and take you away because you don't believe something that they believe. No one's going to come knocking at your door for social media posts, at least not yet. And so I operate under the assumption, just as a person, that if I am ever in a weird situation with a federal officer of some kind, if they ask me for my ID, I can provide that for them. If for some reason I do not have my ID or that is not enough for them, I have my birth certificate and my marriage license in a box in my closet, like every normal person does. These are not things that are over the top. I don't mind proving my citizenship to somebody in the event that I'm in a situation where that's something that's necessary. People want to go oh, well, your ID isn't a citizenship proof. Well, yeah, but if any officer that takes my ID looks up my information, it's going to be in the file that they have on me that I am a citizen. I am not under the impression that I am living in some private enclave in my home in Southern California and that nobody knows who I am and that nobody knows where my children are and that the government has no idea what I do. I'm not under that mistaken impression. We live in a nanny state. We live in the post 9/11 Patriot Act age, and I understand that every single thing I say and do online is also being monitored. That's fine with me. I don't actually think there's somebody personally monitoring me, but my point is if I ever did anything, they could come and find me because they know where I am because I am a citizen of the United States of America, and that still means something. So to me, I have no problem in a situation, be it pulled over, whatever it would be, showing my ID and proving that I am who I say that I am. If you're here illegally and you came here illegally, then you're not allowed to be here. I'm really, really sorry. I'm sorry for the fact that the last multiple administrations didn't enforce the laws. I'm sorry that what feels like innocent people are getting caught up in all of this, but nobody is innocent that crossed the border illegally and lives here illegally. And nobody is innocent who's harboring people. I saw a story today, and of course they're trying to blow this up oh, ICE arrested this American citizen. Well, okay, yeah, he was an American citizen, but first of all, he wouldn't prove it to them. He just kept not proving it. I know I wasn't there. I don't know the situation. Maybe he didn't have his paperwork with him. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. He wouldn't prove it with them. He wouldn't cooperate with them. And he was harboring 2 illegals that were on the ICE deportation list for stuff like rape. So at that point, you as the American citizen are also disobeying the law. So so ICE can in fact arrest you at that point. And I don't know all the legal jurisdictions for once ICE arrests you, what happens with that. Unfortunately, I am not a lawyer. My point is, if you are a legal citizen of this country, then you should not feel uncomfortable living in this country unless you're doing something wrong. Now, flip that over to homeschooling. And a lot of people's biggest homeschooling thing is, well, but you should be okay with a little bit of regulation, right? Because if you are who you say you are and you're doing the right thing, that's fine. But how do we know? And so this took me a few minutes to try to figure out exactly how to explain it. And my husband was helpful because he reminded me that there are 3 spheres of sovereignty in the United States. as far as the government goes. This is not true for every other country, but in the United States, there's 3 spheres of sovereignty, and those are the government, and they have their rules and their regulations and their laws and their enforcers of those laws. And then we have the family, which in the United States is protected and free. And then there's also the church and like religion, I guess. So that one's not really relevant in this particular conversation. But the 2 that are relevant are the sphere of government and the sphere of home or private citizenship. So I think it's important to remember that the government has an obligation to protect our freedoms, because the freedoms are not something that they give us. They are something that they are there to protect. So our freedoms in the country of the United States of America, we believe that our freedoms come from God specifically. Our rights and therefore our freedoms come from God. Believe in a deity if you want, don't have to, I don't care. The point is they come from outside the government. The government does not give us our rights, they protect our rights. So, however, when they do give you something like citizenship, they do in fact have the right to enforce citizenship laws and then double check that you're a citizen. And so I think that's why we're having like a disconnect here, because the governments do give citizenship, and it is then their prerogative and their duty to enforce the laws that are connected to said citizenship and living in a community. Now, the government does not give me the right to have children. They do not give me the right to be married. They might regulate that marriage, and they might regulate the education of my children, but they do not give me those rights. They are there to protect those rights. Okay. So they can offer public education if they like. They can mandate that all children go, or that all children get an education. I actually don't have a problem with that. I think that every country should have education for their children. I think that you should educate your children. I think that's one of the number one things that you should do as a parent. And I think that's one of the number one things that God calls us to do as a parent. And even if you have your children in a public school or a private school, you're still educating them all day, every single second of the day. That's education is life. However, in the United States, we still have a reasonable expectation that the parental rights trump any rights of the state or the government, federal or state. And so when you come at me and you say, well, yeah, but there's some people that are going to abuse their kids, and they're going to abuse the system, and they're never going to send them to school, and there's never going to be a mandated reporter that sees them. That is true. That is tragic. But for every single anecdote about homeschoolers being abused, there's an equally abhorrent anecdote about people that were in the public school system that were abused and nobody caught it all of their entire life. Like, it's not, I'm not trying to like use that as an excuse, but my point is there's going to be abuse anytime there is a system, anytime a parent who is going to already abuse their kid is part of any system, public or homeschooling or private education, like they're going to do it and they're going to try to get away with it regardless of the system that they're in. So you can't come to me and say, because somebody might abuse their kid, you have to prove that you're not abusing your kid. That's not how the United States of America works. That's not how freedom works. That's not how the government works, because the government is there to protect my rights, and my rights include raising my children as I see fit in my home. Now, of course, if I am being a criminal and I am abusing my children, which is a crime, then the government, in its state sphere of sovereignty, does in fact have the right to come to my house and remove my children, because I am committing a crime. But you cannot do that until a crime has been committed. So to just suppose a crime on every single homeschooler because one homeschooler or some homeschooler, let's say 1% of homeschoolers, which is an absurd amount of homeschoolers. Let's say 0.5% of homeschoolers are abusing their kids. That still does not mean that 99.5% of the other homeschooler families should therefore have some sort of like government regulation where government's checking in Unless you think, oh, Caitlin, that's not what we're asking for. We just want a little bit of a standard, or we just want a little bit of a system, or we just want like one check-in a year. That is never where it stops. And we all know this. We're not stupid. We know that the United States government, if you give them an inch, will take a whole mile, not even a mile, a nautical mile, which I learned today at the Reagan Library is like way more than an actual mile. So if you give the government an inch, they're going to take a frickin' nautical mile. And we know this. We just watched this happen in 2020. We watched it happen over and over and over and over. And so I'll be damned if I'm going to let one person's sob story affect all of the hundreds of thousands, close to millions now, of people in the United States that are homeschooling wonderfully and to their children's vast benefit. Okay. And so that's why it's not hypocritical for me to say that I'm okay with border and citizenship and like federal enforcement of those laws. It's not hypocritical for me to say that I'm okay with proving my citizenship outside my home to somebody in some capacity. If they were coming and knocking on my door, that would not really be okay, and I'd call a lawyer. But the point is, it is their jurisdiction to enforce citizenship laws, but it's also their jurisdiction to stay out of my home unless they have a reasonable and like evidence to prove that I'm doing something illegal in my home. And regulating homeschooling it presupposes guilt on parents that have no guilt, that are innocent. Apparently my brain is done. Okay, so in conclusion, I'll get back on my soapbox a little bit about the beauty of homeschooling. As you all know, that is my thing and I love it. But I was really interested to find a study on HSLDA's website, and they looked at the study looked at the differences in educational like attainment or like outcomes for homeschoolers in states that had really high regulations like New York versus like states that have almost no regulations like New Jersey. And there was no difference. The only difference is that in the states with high regulations, you have super stressed out parents who are attempting to comply with laundry lists of things. And when they do things like miss deadlines, schools start sending police officers to their door. Like, I'm sorry. It is not the same thing to get an ICE police officer at your door if you're harboring an illegal alien as it is to get a police officer at your door because you didn't fill out the right form to take your child out of the public school system. That's simply not the same thing. The sort of pact that the American people make with each other is one of freedom. And within freedom, you're always going to have people that are going to abuse a system of freedom for their gain or for something shady or for criminality like abuse. But you cannot presume guilt on the many because of the few that will take advantage of a free system. And the pact that the American people basically have made with one another over all these 250 years of this beautiful and flawed and greatest nation on earth is that we will use our freedoms for good, that we will be responsible for our freedoms, and that if the government protects our freedoms, we will use those responsibly, and we will build a great nation for our children, and we will build things that we can leave behind for them. And the only thing that will allow us to continue to do that is that if everybody takes a step back and goes, hey, enough with the regulations. You need to let us be free. On the same hand, enforcing the laws of this country that are already on the books is important to do. And it is not hypocritical for me to be okay with that and okay with proving that I'm a citizen in public, and also thinking that the government has no right to come into my house and regulate what I'm teaching my kids. Because I am a good parent and I'm going to teach them well. And they're going to be better educated than any education they would get in a school system because I am privately tutoring them at home by myself. All right, so I am now out of all the things to say. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Link below for that study that I found from HSLDA about the outcomes of highly regulated states being the same as the outcomes of very lowly regulated states. Thanks for listening. Good night.